We've had 3 fascinating talks, and it's been great to see the Worldwide Educating for the Future Index. We now do have about 15 minutes left for questions, comments, thoughts and discussion, and our wonderful team with the roving mics are here. Are there any questions that people are desperately eager to ask? We have one over here. If there are any more, we can make sure the microphones get to you, and there's then one over on that side after that.
Thank you. So I have one quick question for Trisha. Would you share with us the latest performance of China in Wi-Fi, and what's the key findings and insights for China to improve?
Sure. I actually don't have the full rankings in front of me right now, but what I'd say is that China did have some improvements between the 2017 and the 2018 version of the index. Obviously, we've also changed our framework a little bit. We looked at how well some policies are implemented, how often strategies are reviewed, etc. So China did make an improvement. I'm sorry I don't have the full rankings in front of me to discuss China's rank in a bit more detail, but I'm happy to talk to you separately after this. Thank you.
I don't know if either of you wants to pick up the question about China more generally, not the results that you don't have in front of you either. But
I can talk from a university rankings perspective. I mean, China has been phenomenal over the last decade. With the support of the government, Chinese universities have particularly focused on improving research output and then research quality and also infrastructure to create an environment where international students will want to come and visit. So I think that China has been the developed country that has seen its top 200 ranked universities improve in most places over the last decade in our ranking system, and it has been very strongly sort of research quality led, but it's now beginning to be influenced by attraction of more international faculty and more international students as well. So China is now catching up with the US in terms of the number of international students studying in country, again with the support of the Chinese government encouraging that. So very dynamic environment.
Tim.
So it's easy to be oversimplistic, of course, when thinking about China. Very huge country, very, very diverse. But it is interesting overall, China achieves a higher level of literacy than the US. What's most important about the rankings, I think, is that Shanghai entered PISA for the first time a few years ago and came straight in at the top. Everybody said they cheated. No, they didn't. When you look systematically at the nature of the learning in Shanghai, as we have done, it is remarkable, and they deserve that top ranking in terms of the performance in their schools. China is using, much as Germany has adopted a very sensitive approach to these league tables, China is approaching Shanghai in a very interesting way. It's using it as a laboratory. It's using it as a place where they experiment with new approaches to educational achievement. They monitor to educational improvement. They monitor the achievement very closely, and then link across the nation in terms of educational improvement. I think that's a very prudent approach.
Thank you. Up over there. Who will be next after that?
Thank you. Great presentations again. I wanted to come back to the question on the value of rankings. So I'm putting this from the perspective of somebody who's directed a global report that measured progress towards the education goals, the UNESCO report, for a couple of years and was involved in it for more years, which had rankings on the Education Development Index. But we actually decided to downplay that index because all you got was countries coming along and sort of either questioning why am I there or celebrating that they're at the top. And actually, as others who've done analysis of the PISA data have shown, the confidence intervals are such that actually countries are overlapping, and something that looks like a movement up or down isn't really a change. So when you were showing the change in the top 10 for the QS scores, I suspect actually those shifts aren't necessarily real shifts, or perhaps they are, and you can correct me on that. So I feel that there's sometimes a giant danger that we get into these sort of quick win types of debates on rankings, when actually the real substance and discussion are the things that you've been talking about. Right. And maybe one answer is, and I'll answer my own question, maybe partly is, okay, it's a way into those discussions, but I'm just afraid of the dangers that we can sometimes do more harm than good by giving too much attention to the rankings themselves.
Who wants to go first? I'll spare Trisha this time.
I can start. So I actually completely agree with you. I think rankings have to be treated with caution. I think they exist because consumers want them. The Umberto Eco quote, I think, is highly relevant. Parents, as well as young people, need to be able to take a huge amount of data and have it delivered to them in a manageable format. So that popularity means that there is a requirement for them, but you have to then be extremely cautious in how you use them to guide policy. And we would always recommend you look at the underlying data. And so, again, when you look at the movements in relative performance, and perhaps I won't pick on the top 10, but the China example I gave earlier is more easy to represent. When you look at the absolute increase in papers produced, in citations produced, and then citations per faculty ratio, there's a fundamental, dramatic increase in Chinese research output over the last decade. And then there have been many other aspects of university improvement, the investment in their infrastructure, the development of Tsinghua as an example, it is an incredibly dynamic university that's innovating in all sorts of levels. So there are different ways you can measure those performance improvements. What matters is that institutions are seeking to improve performance. And the only other defense I'd give of rankings is they do seem to encourage institutions to just wake up a little bit and take note, which maybe that's good, maybe it's not.
Tim, do you want to?
Yeah, I think, do we in Cambridge Assessment, we do a great deal of transnational comparative work, do we pay the greatest attention to the rankings? No, we don't. We pay much more attention to the detailed data underneath and how that feeds into the wider comparative work we do, as my presentation suggested. They're really useful. Rankings are problematic because the press pay a great deal of attention to them. Policymakers pay probably too much attention to them. And if they give rise to short-term panic and instability, that's a bad thing. But that doesn't happen everywhere. What I couldn't understand initially was, why did countries want to join PISA if they were going to come bottom? It doesn't seem to be very sensible. Now, it's those countries that are thinking a lot more systematically about what will this tell us that we can feed into well-structured, well-informed domestic policy making. And that's becoming emergent even at those who've come in at quite a low level into the rankings.
Trisha?
Yeah, just to add on to what my colleagues here have said, it is obviously a very simplistic way of looking at some very complex issues. At the EIU, we do a lot of indices, and what I like to say is that it is a structured way of looking at big sort of topics. In this case, how to educate for the future. So yeah, maybe not focus on rankings. Obviously, we're sitting amidst an academic crowd, so we're a little bit more critical, which is great. But there's a lot of great information when you dig deeper into the indicators. We've had a lot of great feedback from policymakers who sit down with us and go, oh, that's interesting that my country scored this way. Can you tell me why? Or how can I improve it the next year? Yes, one approach is that they're trying to improve their score or their ranking next year, but they're also trying to understand why we've scored countries the way they have and how they can make change. And I think there's a lot of positive that comes out of that.
And watch the movement as well. That's the other thing. So people don't look at the middle block in TIMSS and PISA, and they don't look at how countries are moving. And actually it's the relatively fast-moving countries that are improving in equity and attainment, and then reading back into what it is that they're doing, which is fascinating. It's looking at the outliers. I mean, Kazakhstan does brilliantly in mathematics. Weird. So then you look at it in a great deal of detail, and you can trace it back to some fascinating pedagogy, which goes back to the 1930s, and then to pre-revolutionary mathematics institutes in the curriculum. And you can learn a great deal from that. So again, rankings don't just look at number one. Look at what's going on, particularly over time.
We have time for maybe one more question. And there's one over here. And then I might throw a cheeky one of my own in if we have a few seconds.
Thank you for sharing. I have a quick question. Have you sort of provided any guidebook or manual for the common readers to use your index, ranking, or assessment score? From my perspective view, before I came to UK, I did make a lot of work to select my dream university. But basically, what I didn't know is basically the ranking number. It's a good university, but why it's good? In what aspect is good? I have no idea. I think in my education should be very common to most of the students. Thank you.
Who wants to pick that up first?
So QS believes in transparency, so all of our rankings data is published online, detailed methodologies, and very detailed guides for both young people and then on the QS.com blog for academics to look at how to read and interpret the rankings. So I think we're pretty good on that regard.
Sure. I mean, I would hope that our benchmarking tools and rankings are clear. We don't really have, I guess, guidebooks on how to decipher the rankings, but in all of our policy benchmarking exercises, we obviously have a methodology page, and again, we're transparent with what kind of indicators there are and how we collected that information. And we welcome your inputs, insights, and questions. It's a way that we improve our indices year on year.
Tim?
I think the issue of destinations is vital. So having data which enables us to trace where does this type of person go once they've had a certain type of educational experience at an institution, that gives you very important insights. And the more we have information on what institutions are able to give people in order for them to progress to particular destinations, I think the better that people can make decisions about which institution to choose.
Completely agree.
But I think the transparency piece is I'm reminded of I can't remember who it was who did a study of which universities were doing well. And there was a comparison between Cambridge and another place, which said that the average income, I think a year after graduation, was quite a bit lower from Cambridge. And it turned out that's because lots of people went on to do doctorates, which perhaps says more about academic funding than whether Cambridge was succeeding or failing by getting people into doctorate positions. The one very brief question I have, and it's one I keep asking at things like this in my previous roles, and because it's such an easy question, I'll give you sort of a sentence or so to answer it. If you're measuring something, you have to know what the purpose is.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for each of you, what is actually the point of education? In a sentence.
Trish?
Yeah, sure. To change the world.
So we have to change the world.
So I have a background in economics and business management at Wharton, and so I am very wedded to the view that education is a pathway to a better career, and I feel strongly about that.
Okay, so we have the changing the world, a better career. Tim?
So I like Matthew Arnold, standing on the shoulder of giants. And for me, you inherit the colour of your eyes, you inherit certain dispositions, but the most important thing that education gives is it gives you all of the things that you wouldn't have acquired by any other means. And for me, that's the fundamental purpose of education.
3 fascinating answers from 3 fascinating panellists. Thank you all very much. Thank you.